This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Happy New Year. Today's reflections are from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, 1 through 18. God with us, the incarnation of the Word. It's a simple message that God is revealed in a human person. But in its simplicity, it too can baffle us. Our God, who can do anything and everything, why send us his Son to a lowly manger and to the cross? I want to share a story this morning that made it into the newspaper some time ago. Then I just came across it for the first time. And although it is written as a Christmas parable by a religion editor, Louis Cassels, for United Press International, I found it to be a simple and beautiful way to help us understand this week's gospel. God with us, the incarnation of the Word. The gift in the manger, grace upon grace. The gift of the cross, grace upon grace. Castle wrote, "Once upon a time there was a man who looked upon Christmas as a lot of humbug. He wasn't a Scrooge. He was a kind and decent person, generous to his family, upright in all his dealings with other people. But he just didn't believe all the stuff about incarnation, about God becoming human, which churches proclaim at Christmas. And he was too honest to pretend that he did. I'm truly sorry to distress you," he told his wife, who was a faithful churchgoer. "But I simply cannot understand this claim that God becomes human. It doesn't make any sense to me." On Christmas Eve, his wife and children went to church for the midnight service. He declined to accompany them. "I'd feel like a hypocrite," he explained. "I'd rather stay at home, but I'll wait up for you." Shortly after his family drove away in the car, snow began to fall. He went to the window and watched the flurries getting heavier and heavier. If we must have Christmas, he thought, at least it's nice to have a white one. He went back to his chair by the fireside and began to read his newspaper. A few minutes later, he was startled by a thudding sound. It was quickly followed by another, then another. He thought that someone must have been throwing snowballs at his living room window. When he went to the door to investigate, he found a flock of birds huddled miserably in the storm. They'd been caught in the storm and in a desperate search for shelter had tried to fly through his window. "I can't let these poor creatures lie there and freeze," he thought, "but how can I help them?" Then he remembered the barn where his children's pony was stabled. It would provide a warm shelter. He put on his coat and boots and trampled through the deepening snow to the barn. He opened the barn door wide and turned on a light. The birds didn't come in. Food will lure them in, he thought. So he hurried back to the house for breadcrumbs, which he sprinkled on the snow to make a trail into the barn. To his dismay, the birds ignored the breadcrumbs and continued to flop around helplessly in the snow. He tried shooing them into the barn by walking around and waving his arms, but they scattered in every direction except to the warm, lighted barn. "They find me a strange and terrifying creature," he said to himself, "and I can't seem to think of any way to let them know that they can trust me. If only I could be a bird myself for a few minutes. Perhaps I could lead them to safety." Just at that moment, the church bells began to ring. He stood silent for a while, listening to the bells ringing in Christmas. Then he sank to his knees in the snow and looked up to heaven and said out loud, "Dear God, now I do understand." He whispered, "Now I see why you had to do it." I think that's a wonderful parable. He realized in that experience the only way to understand that flock of birds was to become one. And then he understood why it was necessary for Jesus to be human while still fully divine. In Jesus Christ, God comes to us to be with us. Does this parable help you to see, to understand why God sent his Son? The grace of God is found in a person, Jesus Christ. When he was born, as an infant and then growing into a man, he was always, still is, God's incarnate message. His word to humanity. In the Gospel of John, it seems that he wants us to understand how much better Jesus is than anything we could ever trust in. Not just because he's God's only son, but because he understands us better than we understand ourselves. It is he who is full of grace and truth. It is he that provides us grace upon grace. May you recognize each and every day the grace he provides to you. Thanks be to God.